Chapter 1: The Unexpected Gift. The autumn air in Boston carried a chill that clung to my black dress as I walked behind the casket. I thought burying my father meant closing a painful chapter. But when the will was read, I was handed a Boston townhouse, acres in New Hampshire, and a trust worth $2.5 million. My sister's face twisted with rage, my brother-in-law laughed with spite, and my Uncle Gerald smiled like a man who knew something I did not. In that moment, I believed I was chosen, never realizing the fortune in my hands was really a loaded trap that would brand me the heiress of debt and nearly destroy my life. The funeral had been long, a blur of hymns and condolences, the scent of lilies thick in the air. I walked slowly behind the casket, remembering a childhood spent trailing after my father at construction sites, watching him shake hands with contractors, hearing the pride in his voice when he said the Harrison name meant something in the city. That pride had crumbled in 2018, when Harrison & Sons Construction collapsed under debts too heavy to bear. For years afterward, I had watched him wither, carrying shame like a second illness. Now as I stood by his grave, I wanted to believe I could carry the name forward, polished and whole again. After the burial, we gathered downtown at the law office, a building of cold stone and polished brass. The mahogany table stretched endlessly, and every chair around it carried tension. Emily sat stiffly, her manicured nails drumming the armrest. Michael leaned back with smug ease, his tie loosened as if he owned the place. Gerald waited at the far end, his posture composed, his expression unreadable. The attorney began to read. His voice was steady, practiced, and every few lines my name surfaced again. My heart thudded harder each time. When he reached the section naming me as sole beneficiary, silence thundered through the room. Emily's breath caught, then came out sharp. "This is ridiculous. She cannot have everything." Michael gave a short laugh. "Of course she can. Daddy's little princess always gets the prize." Heat rushed up my neck, but I kept my chin high. I wanted to defend myself, to tell them I had sacrificed years holding my own business together while they chased comfort. But the words stuck in my throat. The attorney continued, his tone clinical. "Richard Harrison leaves his primary residence on Commonwealth Avenue, the Rockingham County property in New Hampshire, and the Harrison Family Trust, valued at approximately $2.5 million. To his daughter, Claire Harrison." For a moment, I could not breathe. A townhouse in Boston, the country land I had always loved, and more money than I had ever dreamed of. My studio's debts, the sleepless nights, the constant fear of bills swept away in a single sentence. Emily slammed her palm on the table. "This is not justice. He was not in his right mind." "We will fight this." Michael leaned toward her, muttering but loud enough for me to hear. "Let her celebrate. The fall will be spectacular." Gerald finally spoke. His voice was calm, almost soothing, but the weight in it chilled me. If this is what Richard wanted, then it stands. None of us should dispute his wishes. The room froze. For a moment, I thought he was defending me, but when our eyes met, I saw something different. His faint smile was not kindness. It was knowledge. He knew something I did not. The attorney shuffled the last pages. "There is also a supplementary clause attached, an assumption of liabilities addendum. We will review the details at a later date." His words barely registered. All I could see was the vision of freedom opening before me. The townhouse shining with new life, the New Hampshire land as a retreat, the trust as a lifeline to security. The rest was background noise. I nodded absently, signing where he indicated, hardly noticing the ink drying under my hand. When the meeting adjourned, Emily stormed past me, her heels clattering. "This is not over," she spat. Michael smirked as he followed. "Enjoy it while it lasts, Claire. Money burns faster than you think." Gerald lingered in the doorway, pulling on his coat with deliberate calm. He paused, staring at me for a long moment, then let that unsettling smile creep across his face before disappearing into the cold Boston evening. I stepped out into the street holding the folder of legal papers, the city rushing around me, cars honking, people laughing on sidewalks, all unaware that my life had just been rewritten inside those walls. The weight of the inheritance settled in my arms like treasure and chains all at once. I walked toward the commons, the crisp air biting but invigorating. For the first time in years, I imagined paying off every debt, freeing my studio from the constant fear of collapse, standing tall in a city that had once looked down on me. I imagined reclaiming the Harrison name, not as a cautionary tale of failure, but as proof of survival. A smile broke across my face, unbidden, as I whispered to myself, "It is finally over. I am free." But deep down, hidden beneath the relief, something twisted uneasily. The look in Gerald's eyes, the bitterness in Emily's voice, the mocking laughter of Michael. They were shadows trailing close behind my joy. Still, I pushed the doubts aside. I wanted to believe my father's gift was a blessing, not a curse. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to smile, convinced that the worst was behind me. I had no idea the inheritance I clutched so tightly was already tightening around me, a trap waiting for its moment to spring. Chapter 2. Warnings Ignored. A few weeks later, I found myself sitting at the long dining table in Emily's house in Brookline, the crystal chandelier above us throwing light over her carefully polished silverware. She had insisted on hosting a family dinner to discuss the estate, though I knew it was really an opportunity to show me how little she approved of the will. Michael poured wine with exaggerated care, and the moment the glasses were full, Emily fixed her eyes on me with that sharp smile she used when she wanted to cut. "No one gives away a gift like that for free," she said, swirling her glass. "Father must have tied strings around every dollar." Michael leaned back, smirking. "She is right, Claire. You should not be so quick to celebrate. You know we could contest the will. It would not be difficult to convince a judge that Richard was under pressure or that the distribution was unfair." I felt the muscles in my jaw tighten. "I am not stealing anything. I simply accepted what was written." Emily let out a laugh that had no warmth. "You always were the favorite. Now you get to be the rich favorite, too." The conversation spiraled into jabs and insinuations until I finally excused myself. I walked home through the cold streets, clutching my coat, telling myself they were only bitter because they had expected more. Still, their words stuck to me like burrs, needling at the edges of my relief. A few days later, an envelope arrived in my mailbox with the seal of the Internal Revenue Service. My hands trembled as I tore it open. Inside was a notice of federal tax lien against the estate of Harrison and Sons Construction. It listed unpaid payroll taxes, penalties, and accrued interest. The total was nearly $200,000. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the numbers, the paper growing damp under my palms. "It must be a mistake," I whispered to myself. Father's affairs were messy, but surely this was resolved during the bankruptcy. I folded the letter and shoved it back into the envelope, convincing myself I would call the attorney on Monday. When Monday came, I walked into the office of David Ross, the estate lawyer who had read the will. He adjusted his glasses as I handed him the notice. He frowned, scanned the pages, and then looked at me carefully. "It seems the company failed to satisfy some payroll taxes before it closed," he explained. "When assets transfer, certain liens remain attached." I felt heat rising in my chest. "Are you saying this is my responsibility?" He hesitated. "Technically, the lien attaches to estate property. Since you accepted the inheritance, the IRS may look to you as the new responsible party. But do not panic yet. These things can sometimes be negotiated." I left his office trying to breathe evenly, but the streets of downtown Boston blurred around me. Every step home I repeated in my head that it would work out, that this was just a formality. That weekend, Emily invited me again, though her tone on the phone was anything but kind. When I arrived, she wasted no time. "So, did you get any surprise mail lately?" she asked, her voice sugary. Michael leaned forward. "We heard some creditors are circling. If you are smart, you will let us petition the court to reopen the estate. At least then the debt would be spread." I clenched my fists under the table. "That is none of your business." Emily tilted her head. "You think you can shoulder all this on your own fine. But don't come crying when the house in Boston has a lien slapped on it." Their words echoed the very letter I had hidden in my drawer. My stomach twisted, but I forced myself to stay calm. "I can handle it," I said firmly. The rest of the meal was poisoned by tension. Gerald spoke little, only watching me with that same unreadable expression, as if waiting for me to crack. When dessert came, I could not stomach a bite. I left early, walking through the dark, icy air with tears stinging my eyes. At home, I pulled out the envelope again and stared at the numbers under the harsh kitchen light. My heart pounded, but my mind clung to a fragile thread of denial. I told myself that the lien was old, that David would clear it, that the IRS did not really expect me to pay for the ruins of a company that had died years ago. I convinced myself that these were only shadows, not real threats. I poured a glass of water and sat by the window, watching the lights of Boston flicker against the night sky. Somewhere deep down I knew this was only the beginning. But I pressed that thought away, clinging to the illusion that I was still safe, that my father's gift had not already begun to unravel. Chapter 3. The Trap Revealed. The letter from the Suffolk County Probate Court arrived on a gray January morning, its bold lettering cutting through the facade of ordinary mail. My hands shook as I opened it and scanned the words that summoned me to a formal hearing regarding the Harrison estate. The pit in my stomach deepened with every line. They wanted me in court to address outstanding liabilities attached to the inheritance. When I walked into the courthouse the following week, the marble floors felt colder than the air outside. Reporters lined the steps, their cameras flashing as I tried to push past. Someone shouted, "Is it true you inherited millions in debt?" and I nearly stumbled. I kept my head down, clutching the folder David Ross had prepared. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick with whispers. Emily sat with Michael behind the opposing counsel's table, her eyes bright with a satisfaction she did not bother to hide. Gerald was already seated with a stiff posture, speaking quietly with his attorney. My lawyer, David, leaned toward me as we sat. "Stay calm, Claire. Let me handle the legal points," he said softly. The judge called the session to order, and the proceedings began. Documents were presented, pages turned, and then the words that froze me where I sat. The assumption of liabilities. Addendum, the clerk read aloud, executed alongside the last will and testament of Richard Harrison. David shot up immediately. "Your Honor, my client was never informed of this addendum. It was hidden until after she signed the initial acknowledgement." The judge peered over his glasses. "Nevertheless, the document is duly notarized and filed. It clearly states that the designated heir accepts all outstanding obligations of Harrison & Sons construction. The total liabilities at present exceed $3.2 million. Gasps spread across the room. I felt my throat close, tears blurring my vision. My voice cracked as I whispered to David, $3.2 million. "I cannot pay that." Emily leaned toward Michael, her words loud enough for me to hear. "Looks like the princess just inherited a mountain of debt instead of a crown." Michael chuckled, shaking his head. "Couldn't have happened to a more deserving person." Gerald finally spoke, his voice calm and deliberate. "This is the consequence of being the sole beneficiary. Responsibility comes with reward." Richard understood that. I stared at him, my chest burning. You knew this was buried in the papers." He met my gaze without flinching. "I warned no one. The documents speak for themselves." The judge tapped his gavel. "Order. The matter today is the enforceability of the addendum, and by all evidence, it is enforceable." David stood again, his tone sharp. "Your Honor, there is also the matter of disclaiming an inheritance. My client was denied that option due to lack of disclosure." The judge adjusted his papers. "She may still attempt to disclaim, but the timeliness is questionable. Creditors will argue she has already exercised control over the assets." My chest tightened as the weight of the words sank in. I had signed acknowledgement papers, taken possession of the townhouse, and even walked through the land in New Hampshire, imagining it as mine. By doing so, I had tied myself to everything, even the ruin. Reporters scribbled furiously. I could almost hear the headlines forming. Heiress of Debt. The story of a woman who thought she won a fortune only to be crushed by obligations. When the hearing recessed for lunch, I hurried out into the corridor, tears streaming unchecked. Emily caught up to me, her heels clicking on the stone floor. $3.2 million, she said, almost gleeful. "That should keep you busy for a while." Michael smirked. "Maybe you should sell the townhouse to cover the interest." "I hear foreclosure auctions can be quick." I spun on them, my voice breaking. "You are my family. Do you even care what this is doing to me?" Emily's smile vanished for a moment, replaced by something colder. "Family ended the moment you took everything for yourself. Enjoy your empire of debt, Claire." They walked away, leaving me trembling in the hallway. David approached, placing a steady hand on my shoulder. "We are not finished. There are ways to fight, but you need to prepare for a battle. This will not disappear." I nodded weakly, though my legs felt like they might give out. Reporters had gathered near the exit doors. When I stepped outside, the winter light blinded me and voices rose in a storm. "Claire, how much debt is attached to the estate? Will you lose the townhouse? Do you regret accepting the inheritance?" I pushed through them, tears streaking my face, my chest aching with humiliation. Every camera captured my collapse. Every headline ready to brand me not as the woman who inherited millions, but as the Harrison daughter shackled to her father's unpaid past. Back home that night, I sat in the silent townhouse with unopened boxes around me. The rooms that had felt like a gift now pressed in like walls of a prison. I buried my face in my hands, realizing that what I had thought was freedom was nothing more than a trap sealed with ink and signatures. For the first time, I understood that inheritance is not always a blessing. Sometimes it is a weight so heavy it pulls you under before you even have a chance to breathe. Chapter 4. Family in Ruins. The Boston Globe carried the headline the following week. Heiress of Debt. My picture was plastered beside the words, a photograph taken as I left the courthouse in tears. The article detailed the $3.2 million in liabilities, speculated on the possibility of foreclosure, and quoted an unnamed family source who claimed I was on the verge of bankruptcy. I did not need to guess who that source was. Michael had always known how to whisper into the right ears. When I walked into my studio that morning, 2 clients were waiting in the lobby. They avoided my eyes, shifting uncomfortably, and within minutes, one of them asked for her deposit back. She mumbled something about delays, but I saw the folded newspaper peeking from her purse. By the end of the day, an important contract was canceled. The email cold and curt. Reputation was everything in design, and mine was unraveling before I could defend myself. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with Barbara, my best friend since college. She pushed the paper aside and looked at me with steady eyes. "You need to stop pretending this will blow over," she said. "Gerald is pulling strings and Michael is feeding the press. You have to dig into the files. There is something they don't want you to see." I rubbed my temples. "I am exhausted, Barb. Every day it feels like another brick falling on me. Now the studio is bleeding clients. How am I supposed to fight when I can barely stand?" She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You fight because if you do not, they will bury you. Look at the timing. Emily just signed an affidavit contesting the probate. Who do you think handed her that idea?" The news hit me like a blow. "An affidavit. She actually filed against me." Barbara nodded grimly. I checked the court docket. "It is official. Gerald is advising her. They want to reopen the estate, to force redistribution, maybe even claw back assets. If they succeed, you will be left with nothing but the debt." The room spun around me. My own sister had gone from bitter words to a legal weapon aimed at my chest. The next morning, I drove to Emily's house, fury burning in my veins. She opened the door in a silk robe, looking unsurprised. "You really should have called," she said coolly. I pushed past her into the living room. "How could you sign that affidavit?" "You know what this means for me." Emily crossed her arms. "It means fairness. Father never should have dumped everything on you." Gerald explained the contest process, and it makes sense. Why should I stand by while you inherit both the assets and the chance to walk away from the debts? "Because we are family," I said, my voice shaking. She laughed, bitter and sharp. "Family does not mean handing you the keys while the rest of us get scraps." Gerald is right. This is about balance. Michael strolled in, sipping coffee. "She is overreacting, Em. Let her burn through what little she has. The court will fix it." I turned to my sister, tears welling. "You would side with Gerald over me. You know what he is capable of." Her eyes hardened. "At least he is honest about what he wants. You hide behind your sad little studio and your victim act. I am done watching you pretend you are the only one who suffered in this family." The words sliced through me. I left without another word, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. By the time I reached home, another reporter was on my front step. He shouted a question about the affidavit and whether my inheritance was about to collapse. I brushed past him, my face burning. The neighborhood was watching. My neighbor's curtains twitched as I rushed inside, humiliation pressing on me from every direction. That night, I sat alone in the half-lit townhouse. Boxes still stacked in corners reminded me of the life I thought I was building. Now they looked like relics of a dream already dead. My phone buzzed with another email canceling a project. The subject line read simply, "Contract termination." I pressed the phone to my chest, a sob breaking free. Barbara came over again, bringing takeout. She set the bags down and looked around at the shadows in the room. "They are isolating you on purpose," she said softly. "That is Gerald's tactic. He makes you look weak, makes everyone believe you are finished, so no one stands with you. You cannot let him win this way." I shook my head. Emily was supposed to stand with me. Even if she was angry, she was my sister. How can she do this? "Blood does not always mean loyalty," Barbara said. "Sometimes it is the ones closest who cut deepest." Her words stung because they were true. I thought of my father's voice, of his promise that family was everything. But now my family was sharpening knives and handing them to my enemies. I looked out the window at the lights of Boston, tears blurring the view. For years I had built my studio, client by client, late nights drafting until my eyes burned. Now my reputation was collapsing because of whispers in legal papers. As the hours passed, the anger in me simmered into something sharper. They wanted me isolated, humiliated, erased. If I let them, they would succeed. But a small spark inside whispered that there had to be a way to fight back. For now, though, I sat in silence, tasting the bitter truth. Family had become the weapon aimed at me, and I was the one bleeding from the blow. Chapter 5. The Search for Truth. By the summer of 2023, the weight of shame had settled into something harder, something closer to resolve. My studio was limping along with only a handful of clients left, and the townhouse felt less like a home than a bunker. Barbara came by one humid evening carrying 2 coffees and a determined look. "You cannot keep letting them write the story," she said, setting the cups on my cluttered desk. "You have to dig into the records. Gerald is counting on you to fold." I rubbed my tired eyes. Even if there is something hidden, how am I supposed to find it? "He has every advantage." Barbara leaned forward. "Then you need someone who knows where to look. Call David Ross. He is not just an estate lawyer. He can track what they buried." The next week, I sat in David's office surrounded by stacks of files. He adjusted his glasses and gestured to a box of documents recently obtained through discovery. "We will start with the addendum," he said. "If there is fraud, it will show in the details." Hours turned into days. Barbara stayed by my side, reading through bank policies and old invoices while David compared signatures and timestamps. The work was suffocating, each page a reminder of how tangled my father's affairs had become. Late one night, Barbara pushed a document toward me. "Look at this," she whispered. "The signature on this version of the addendum does not match the one on the will." I stared at the ink, my heart pounding. It is shaky, almost forced. He was too weak at that point to even hold a pen steady. David leaned closer. "The notary stamp is dated 2 days after Richard was admitted to the hospital. Legally, that is suspicious." Barbara shook her head. "Suspicious is too soft." "It is a lie." The room fell silent as the truth sank in. I pressed my fingers to my temples, torn between anger and grief. If he assumed at anything, it was under pressure. And if he did not, then Gerald forged it. The following evening, we visited an old neighbor, Henry Miller, who had worked as a subcontractor for Harrison & Sons for decades. He was 70 now, living in a modest house in Somerville, and his handshake was still firm. "I heard about your troubles," he said, leading us inside. "Gerald's name keeps floating around, and that is never good." I swallowed hard. "Mr. Miller? Did you ever hear him talk about the company's debts before my father passed?" He leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. "More than once. Gerald told me straight that he planned to push all the liabilities onto whoever took the inheritance. Said Richard would not know the difference near the end." Barbara glanced at me, her eyes wide. David spoke carefully. "Would you be willing to make a statement about that?" Mr. Miller nodded without hesitation. I will not stand by while he ruins you. Your father was sick, not stupid. Gerald has been plotting for years. Driving home, the city lights blurred past as I tried to hold back tears. My chest ached with betrayal, but underneath the pain, a flicker of vindication sparked. We finally had something solid, a thread to pull that might unravel Gerald's scheme. Back in David's office, the investigation deepened. He spread documents across the table, pointing to inconsistencies. Here, the email confirming the addendum was sent at 11:45 at night, long after office hours, and from Gerald's personal account. That is not standard procedure. And here, invoices filed under Harrison & Sons after the company was already declared insolvent. They were deliberately altered. Barbara shook her head in disbelief. He left fingerprints everywhere. I whispered, he thought I would never fight back. As midnight approached, the three of us sat surrounded by evidence. The fluorescent lights buzzed, the air thick with exhaustion, but none of us moved to stop. I looked at the pile of fraudulent documents, the mismatched signatures, the timestamps that made no sense, and felt my throat tighten. I should have protected him, I said quietly. When Dad was weak, I should have been there to stop Gerald. Barbara touched my shoulder gently. Claire, this is not your fault. You are here now. You are seeing it through, David added. Fraud has a way of leaving traces. Gerald was careless because he thought grief would blind you. But grief is sometimes the very thing that sharpens the eyes. I nodded, though my chest still felt heavy. The memory of my father signing papers in his hospital bed haunted me. Did he know what was happening? Did he realize the trap being built around me, or had he trusted his brother until the end? The stack of evidence in front of me was ugly proof of betrayal, but it was also a weapon. For the first time since the nightmare began, I felt the faintest shift in power. Gerald had built his scheme on forged ink and false promises, and now those cracks were showing. The night ended with us sealing the documents into folders, David labeling each piece of evidence with meticulous care. When I stepped out into the humid Boston air, the city felt different. I was still drowning in debt and scandal, but now I carried something that could change everything. The battle was far from over, but I no longer felt like prey. I had seen the first fractures in Gerald's fortress, and I knew we had the patience to keep pressing until the walls came down. Chapter 6. Rock Bottom. By the end of 2023, another envelope arrived, thicker than the rest, stamped with the seal of the Rockingham County Sheriff's Office. My hands went numb as I opened it. Inside was the notice of foreclosure sale for the land in New Hampshire. A date, an hour, and the exact location of the auction were printed in black and white. My father's quiet retreat, the property I once dreamed of restoring, would be sold to the highest bidder. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the notice until the room blurred. The sound of traffic outside faded, and all I could hear was the pounding of my own heartbeat. I had tried to convince myself things could not get worse, but this letter proved I had been wrong. Barbara came over that night and found me clutching the paper. "They are taking everything," I whispered. She knelt beside me, her voice steady. "Claire, listen to me. This is not the end. Foreclosure is a process, not a death sentence. We can appeal." I shook my head, barely able to get the words out. We already tried. David filed a motion to contest, but the judge denied it. Gerald's affidavit and Emily's contest sealed the narrative. They painted me as irresponsible, as if I asked for this. Barbara put her hand on mine. Then we build a new narrative. But you cannot give up. Not now. Her certainty made me cry harder. I wanted to believe her, but the weight of humiliation and loss was crushing me. Over the next weeks, I sold off furniture, jewelry, even heirlooms that had once given me comfort. Anything that could keep the studio's rent current had to go. The townhouse grew emptier with each passing day, shadows lengthening across bare walls. I listed my father's antique desk, the one he had signed contracts on for decades, and when the buyer carried it out the door, I broke down, sobbing into my hands. Neighbors began avoiding me in the hallway. The mailman stopped making small talk. Whispers followed me when I went to the corner store. My name had become a symbol of scandal, of failure, and the shame ate at me like acid. Emily stopped by once, unannounced. She stood in the doorway watching as strangers carried boxes from my living room. "This is worse than I thought," she said softly. I looked at her through swollen eyes. "Are you satisfied now?" "You wanted fairness. This is what it looks like." Her face tightened. "I never wanted this. Gerald said contesting the estate would protect me, but seeing you like this..." Her voice trailed off. From the sidewalk, Michael called up the stairs. "Em, hurry up, we are going to be late." She turned to leave, but I stepped forward. "Emily, he does not care about you. He only cares about what he can gain." Can you not see that Michael's voice cut in again, sharper this time? "Stop wasting your time, Claire. You made your bed, now you get to lie in it." Emily hesitated, glancing between us. For the first time, I saw doubt flicker in her eyes. But she left without another word, following her husband down the street. The studio lost its last major client 2 days before Christmas. The owner of a boutique hotel downtown called to say they could no longer risk the association. I listened in silence, thanked him for his honesty, and hung up the phone. My hand trembled so badly I nearly dropped it. Then I walked into the empty design floor, the boards creaking under my shoes, and felt the walls closing in. Barbara found me there, sitting on the floor surrounded by discarded fabric samples and design sketches that no one would ever see. "You cannot let them win by breaking you," she said, crouching beside me. "I have nothing left," I whispered. "No money, no clients, no family. They took it all." Barbara gripped my shoulders firmly, forcing me to meet her eyes. "That is not true. You still have the truth. You still have the evidence we found. Gerald left fingerprints all over those documents. You are stronger than you think. You just have to remember who you are." Her words cut through the fog for a moment. I closed my eyes, and behind them I saw my father in his hospital bed, frail but still trying to smile. Guilt burned in my chest. I should have protected him, shielded his legacy from Gerald's greed. But then I thought of the forged signatures, the falsified invoices, the midnight emails. Gerald had planned this, not my father. That realization steadied me. The foreclosure notice sat on the table between us, its date circled in red. I picked it up and held it, feeling the weight of the paper and the weight of my father's name. "They want me to quit," I said slowly. "They want me to disappear under the debt and the shame. But I am not going to let Gerald write the ending." Barbara smiled faintly, though her eyes glistened. "Then we start preparing. We take what we have and we make it impossible for the court to ignore." In the days that followed, I continued selling off belongings. The townhouse echoed with emptiness. I slept on a mattress on the floor after the bed was hauled away. I ate meals out of paper containers because the dishes had been sold to pay utilities. Yet with every loss, my determination sharpened. Walking into the cold December air one morning, I caught sight of Emily across the street. She looked at me for a long moment, her face pale, before turning away quickly. Guilt was finally gnawing at her. I could see it. Michael tugged her arm impatiently, already talking about their next investment. He had never hidden that money was his only loyalty. By New Year's Eve, I stood in the bare townhouse with Barbara and David, the foreclosure notice pinned to the wall like a battle flag. We went over the evidence again, page by page, building the case that would expose Gerald. I was exhausted, penniless, and humiliated, but a strange calm began to settle inside me. The worst had already happened. The land would be sold. My studio was ruined. My reputation was shredded. There was nothing left for Gerald to take. And in that emptiness, I found the first spark of freedom. "They thought they broke me," I said aloud. "But this is only the bottom. From here, there is only one way to go." Barbara nodded, her voice fierce. "Then we climb, and we drag him down with us." I let out a shaky breath, looking at the foreclosure date one last time. I was ready. The fight was no longer about saving property or reputation. It was about reclaiming my father's name and my own dignity. The auction in New Hampshire would take the land. The creditors would circle. But I was not finished. For the first time in months, I felt something stronger than despair. I was ready to turn and face Gerald, no matter how much it cost me. Chapter 7. The Trial of Truths. The courthouse in downtown Boston loomed like a stone fortress when I arrived in early spring of 2024. The Suffolk County Probate Court had never felt so intimidating. its columns casting long shadows over the steps crowded with reporters. Flashes from cameras burst around me as Barbara gripped my arm and guided me through the doors. David Ross walked ahead carrying a heavy briefcase, his expression sharp and focused. Inside the courtroom, the air hummed with tension. Gerald sat with his attorneys at the defense table, his silver hair neatly combed, his jaw set in confidence. Emily and Michael were there too, seated behind him. She avoided my gaze while Michael smirked openly. My stomach twisted, but I straightened my back and followed David to our table. The judge entered, a tall man with graying hair and stern eyes. "Court is now in session," he announced. David rose. "Your Honor, today we will demonstrate that the so-called assumption of liabilities addendum attached to Richard Harrison's will was fraudulent. We will show evidence of forgery, altered financial documents, and testimony from a credible witness." The opposing attorney stood. "Your Honor, these accusations are baseless. The addendum was properly notarized and filed. My client, Gerald Harrison, has acted within the law." The judge nodded. "Proceed." David opened the folder and placed documents on the stand. First, the signatures. We compared Richard Harrison's verified signatures from earlier that year to the one on the addendum. The inconsistencies are undeniable. The stroke pressure, the angle of the letters, and the tremors in his hand show this signature was forged after he was hospitalized. He handed the papers to the judge, who examined them closely. Murmurs filled the courtroom. David continued. Next, the email timestamp. This correspondence forwarding the addendum came from Gerald Harrison's personal account at 11:45 at night, 2 days after Richard Harrison was admitted to intensive care. Standard procedure would require it to come from the estate attorney's office during business hours. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Counsel, do you dispute this evidence?" Gerald's attorney cleared his throat. "The timing may be irregular, but it does not prove fraud." David's voice hardened. "Then let us hear from our witness." Henry Miller walked slowly to the stand, leaning on his cane. At 70 years old, his voice still carried weight. After swearing the oath, he looked straight at the judge. "I worked with Harrison and Sons for 40 years. In the months before Richard passed, Gerald told me more than once that he planned to push the company's debts onto whoever inherited. He said Richard would not know the difference near the end." Gasps echoed across the room. Gerald shifted in his seat, his face tightening. David asked, "Mr. Miller, are you willing to swear under oath that these conversations occurred?" Miller nodded firmly. "Yes, I am." The defense attorney tried to shake him, questioning his memory, his loyalty, but Miller stood unwavering. "I know what I heard. Gerald planned this. He bragged about it." I felt tears prick my eyes as I watched the testimony unfold. For months, I had been painted as careless. But here was the truth, spoken aloud for everyone to hear. The judge requested a recess. As people filed out, I turned and saw Emily standing near the aisle, her face pale. She walked over hesitantly. "Claire," she whispered, "I did not know it was this bad. Gerald told me you exaggerated, that you were desperate." I swallowed hard. "And you believed him. You signed papers against me." Her eyes filled with tears. I thought I was protecting myself. But seeing the evidence, hearing Mr. Miller, I was wrong. "I am so sorry." For a moment, I wanted to scream at her, to throw every betrayal back in her face. Instead, I whispered, "It is too late for sorry, Emily. But if you mean it, then tell the court the truth." She nodded quickly, her hands trembling. When court resumed, Emily was called to the stand by David. The entire room held its breath as she admitted that Gerald had persuaded her to file the affidavit, promising it would shield her from liability. She confessed she never saw the original addendum, only what Gerald's attorney presented. The judge listened intently, his expression grave. When she stepped down, Gerald's face was flushed with fury. His jaw clamped so tightly it looked like it might crack. David made his closing statement. "Your Honor, the pattern is clear. Forged signatures, altered records, manipulated family members. Gerald Harrison orchestrated a scheme to saddle my client with debts she never agreed to assume. This is fraud." The judge leaned back, silent for what felt like hours. Finally, he spoke. The court finds the assumption of liabilities. Addendum invalid. The evidence shows clear intent to defraud. Therefore, Claire Harrison is not responsible for the debts of Harrison & Sons Construction. Furthermore, due to evidence of financial manipulation, the court orders an asset freeze on Gerald Harrison's holdings, pending further investigation into civil and potentially criminal liability. The gavel struck, and the sound echoed like thunder. I gasped, covering my mouth with both hands. The courtroom erupted in noise, reporters scrambling, relatives whispering. Barbara threw her arms around me, whispering, "You did it." Gerald stood slowly, his face drained of color. He tried to speak, but his attorney tugged at his sleeve, urging him to stay silent. Emily wept quietly in her seat, staring down at her hands. Tears streamed down my cheeks as I rose. For the first time in years, I felt my father's name lift free of the weight Gerald had tried to bury it under. The shame that had followed me through the streets of Boston melted into something lighter, something closer to peace. The judge's words still rang in my ears. Fraud, invalid, not responsible, asset freeze. They were more than legal terms. They were a lifeline, pulling me out of the pit I had been trapped in. As the courtroom emptied, I stood in the center of it all, trembling but unbroken. Justice had taken its time, but it had arrived. And in that moment, I felt whole again. Chapter 8, The True Inheritance. The spring of 2025 brought a different kind of morning. Instead of waking with dread, I opened my eyes to a sense of purpose. The townhouse was modestly furnished again, not with antiques or heirlooms, but with second-hand pieces that felt like mine. That day, the doors of the Harrison Legal Resource Center would open for the first time. The idea had come to me during long nights of reflection. I had endured humiliation because I did not understand the traps hidden in legal language, and I had vowed no one else would suffer the same. With the help of Barbara and David, I rented a small office in Dorchester, painted the walls a hopeful blue, and filled the shelves with guides on probate, estate planning, and consumer rights. On the morning of the opening, neighbors, friends, and even strangers gathered. Barbara bustled around with a clipboard, while David shook hands and reassured attendees that this center would not charge a dime. I stood near the entrance with a ribbon waiting to be cut, my heart pounding with something that felt like pride. Emily appeared in the crowd, her posture hesitant, her face lined with guilt. I froze for a moment, unsure if I could bear to face her again. She walked up slowly, clutching a folded letter. "Claire," she said, her voice low. "I came today because I need to tell you how sorry I am. I let Gerald poison me against you. I was weak, and I hurt you in ways I can never undo." The crowd seemed to fade away as I looked into her eyes. For months I had replayed her betrayal, but in that moment I saw my sister trembling with remorse. I answered softly, "You cannot erase what happened, but if you are ready to change, then stand with me now. This center is about helping people who feel powerless. If you want to be part of that, then prove it." Tears welled in her eyes as she nodded. "I do. I want to help." The ribbon was cut, and the Harrison Legal Resource Center was officially open. People streamed inside, asking questions about wills, taxes, and debts. I sat at a desk and listened to a widow who feared her late husband's creditors would take her home. I explained the concept of disclaiming an inheritance, showed her the protections Massachusetts law afforded, and watched relief flood her face. In her gratitude, I felt my own scars begin to heal. News of the center spread quickly. Local reporters wrote about how the woman once called the Heiress of Debt had transformed her ordeal into a mission to serve others. Clients arrived from every neighborhood, carrying envelopes of confusing paperwork and anxious hearts. Each time I explained their rights and gave them hope, I felt closer to my father, as if honoring him in a way Gerald never could. Meanwhile, Gerald's downfall played out in the background. The investigation into his fraud expanded, revealing a trail of manipulated documents and hidden accounts. His assets were frozen, his reputation in Boston circles destroyed. A civil suit filed by former business partners stripped him of what little influence he had left. He resigned from the board of a local charity under pressure, his name now synonymous with deceit. Michael kept his distance, though rumors swirled of failed ventures and mounting debts. Emily, to her credit, cut ties with his schemes and began volunteering at the center, quietly filing papers and offering coffee to nervous visitors. We never pretended the past had not happened. But slowly, painfully, we began to rebuild something resembling trust. On the 1-year anniversary of the center, we held a small gathering. Barbara raised a toast, her smile proud. To Claire, who turned ashes into something that helps us all. I felt my cheeks flush as I looked around at the faces of those who had stood with me and those who had once doubted me. The weight that had crushed me was gone, replaced by a steady peace. Later that evening, I sat alone in my office, looking at the sign on the door. The Harrison name no longer carried shame. It carried resilience. It carried the proof that justice, though slow, could triumph. I thought of my father and whispered, "We made it right, Dad. Your name is safe." For the first time in years, I truly believed it. If you have followed my story until this moment, I want to thank you for being here. Stories like mine are reminders that betrayal can cut deep, but resilience can carve deeper. If my journey moved you, I hope you will share your thoughts, leave a comment, and stay connected with this channel. Your voice helps keep stories like this alive, and together we can keep uncovering the truths that matter.